Welcome once again to this lunchtime devotion. Today, being with Jesus, we continue our reading. Today, I'll concentrate on Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. If you have your Bible, please turn to Mark chapter 7 as we read through Mark chapter 7, the first 21 verses that we are concentrating on. Mark chapter 7 records, verse 1. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were unclean, that's unwashed. Okay, so even in this first verse and second, you already see that whatever Jesus did or whatever his followers did was being closely scrutinized, observed. And these were not just ordinary people. They say here, teachers of the law that came from Jerusalem. So they are in Galilee. They came all the way up north to Galilee region, even to see and try to, in a way, catch Jesus, see what he's doing wrong. We know for in the past that these are the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, who are out to find fault with Jesus. So these are people observing, and just had a few clashes with them already. Okay, so this one in verse 3 it says, the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to a tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many other traditions, such as washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So rightly says Mark recorded that what they are observing is the tradition of the elders, and this we already talked about in the past. Okay, there is the law of Moses, Mosaic law, that's very clear. Okay, but what the Jews have done over the centuries is they add on their interpretation to what they think the law says. Okay, and part of this cleanliness issue that the Pharisees are very taken up with is the tradition of cleanliness. Literally, they are saying that cleanliness is next to godliness. So you must be physically clean in order to be godly. And they most probably adopted this from the way the priests who entered the tabernacle had to wash themselves, make themselves clean before they can enter the holy place. The kind of tradition. Okay, you got to change your clothing, wash your hands and all that. And this seems to be adopted as a general thing for everyone to keep, which was not in accordance to Mosaic law. Mosaic law didn't require you to wash and all that. Okay, for the sacrifices, yes, there's some ritual washing, but not everyday life. But what the Pharisees have done is they become a tradition. Every time before you eat, you must wash. Okay, and they have a way of washing. Every time you go out, especially a marketplace, when you go to marketplace, you will come in touch with Gentiles, non-Jews. And to the Jews, a non-Jew is defiled, is unclean. So you have touched anything unclean, you have to come back and wash yourself, make yourself ritually clean. So they have added to Moses' law all this tradition of cleanliness, even how to wash your cup, all your pans and all that. You have a whole procedure for doing that. So they've added to the Mosaic law for all this. So verse 5 says, so the Pharisees and teachers of law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with unclean hands? Okay, means they are saying that they are not accusing the disciples of breaking the Mosaic law, but breaking the tradition of the elders, the oral tradition, and by the 3rd century it is written down into a book. Okay, so Jesus replied to them, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. Okay, hypocrites are people who are, or the actors, the false masks. As is written, these people honor me with their lips and their hearts, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. Okay, and this is important important for us to know is Isaiah 29:13. Okay, from Isaiah 29 verse 13. So just tell them, what you are doing is all the rules of man. It's not God's law. Verse 8 says, you have let go of the commands of God, are holding on to the traditions of men. Okay, and this is very important. Just accusing them that yes, God has his law given to Moses, but what you have here are the rules taught by men, the traditions taught by men, and not from God's law. Verse 9 he continues, okay, and he gives one good example. He said to them, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother. I think the 5th commandment. And anyone who curses his father or mother must be put to death. This is part of Levitical law. Okay, so Moses is very clear. You got no choice but to honor your father and mother. And you cannot curse your father and mother. If you curse them, you are to be put to death. Okay, but what have the rulers of the law say? But you said that if a man say to his father or mother, whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is korban. Now korban is a term called offering, a gift devoted to God. Then you no longer let him do anything for his father and mother. Okay, what the whole practice at that time is, if the children, okay, they are supposed to honor their father and mother, support them, take care of them. But if for whatever reason the son do not want to take care of the father or the mother, what the son need to do is go before the priest and says, okay, this sum of money, okay, I dedicate to God, korban, this is an offering to God. And because this sum of money is offered to God, then what is the money that they have cannot be used to help the father and mother, because already offered to God. And what's offered to God, God will determine. Okay, so they sidestep the law of having to take care of their father and their mother. But the funny part of this korban is, because it's just korban offered to God, the son still have full control how to use the money. He can use it for himself and all that, okay, but he can use it as excuse not to help the father and the mother. And that's how they sidestep the 5th commandment. Okay, so that's what Jesus says. Verse 12, then you no longer let him do anything for his father and mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like this. Okay, so the Pharisees at that time, the ruler of the teacher of law, they have crafted all these ways and means to be able to sin, to keep the law, and yet in other ways break the commandments. Okay, so they have broken the 5th commandment by having their own tradition that allows that the commandment to be sidestepped, to be avoided as such lah. Okay, so this is one example that Jesus gave, that you have taken away, in a way, in the manner of speaking, the commandment, and allow the commandment to be broken, and yet the person there sounds to look very nice. Okay, so there's the Jesus teaching against them. Now verse 14 onwards, again Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather is what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. Okay, so he said this very clearly. It's not what you take in that make you unclean. So all your cleaning of your hands, all your cleaning of your cups and all that, is not what makes you unclean. When we talk unclean here, she's talking about spiritual uncleanness, not the physical one. Obviously, you take in rubbish and it make you sick, that's different. That's not what they say. Okay, but actually what he's saying is that if you talk about spiritual cleansing, it's not what you take in that defiles you, Okay, but what comes out from you, then in a way defiles you spiritually. Verse 17 says, after he left the crowd, entered the house, disciples asked him about this parable. Then Jesus got upset with them, angry with them. Are you so dull, he asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach and then out his body. Okay, whole digestive system, alimentary system. In saying this, Jesus declared all food clean. Okay, this is a sub note that Mark writes in, and this is important because even at this time, Jesus already declaring that all food is clean, but it takes a long while. Remember the Acts incident with Peter. Okay, Jesus got shown the vision 3 times before he understood that what God has made clean, do not say it's unclean. Okay, so verse 20 says, and he went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within out of man's heart, evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All this evil come from inside and make a man unclean. Okay, so Jesus is here confronted once again by the teacher of the law, by the Pharisees. Okay, they are complaining why his followers never clean their hands and all that before they take food. And Jesus saying that all these are the traditions of man. All these are the teachings of man. It's not part of God's Mosaic law that he gave the Old Testament. The Old Testament Mosaic law don't have all this cleanliness issue, but it's something that derived from oral tradition. And the Pharisees are so taken up by all this cleanliness that they get very upset that people don't follow what they do. And they do it for the sake of appearance, to show people how holy they are. The normal people don't bother about this. Okay, but because Jesus is the rabbi and his disciples are the followers of the rabbi, so they expected a rabbi to keep all the cleanliness tradition, which he says no. And he gives the example of how the tradition of man have been used to break the commandments of God, and they get away with it. So I think that's important for us as we read this, okay, to think, even today in our churches, are we guilty of this? Are we guilty of having the traditions of man that goes against the teachings of God? Have we got traditions that are in place that affect our relationship with God? I think something that we need to discuss and think through and talk about. Okay, so this is my short sharing just for today on all this whole area of tradition of man versus God's law and God's teachings. I think that's important. And we must always remember, it's not what goes into us that makes us unclean spiritually. It's what comes out of us that will make us spiritually unclean.